So before the season started, I wanted to do a quick rundown of the power rankings. I've never technically done something like this. These are going to be slightly different than the power rankings on LoL Esports. I'm a panel member for those, and I still agree with the rankings, but I'm not going with the consensus North American opinion here. I'm just kind of going with my own views on the top 10. So I'm going to be counting down from 10 to 1. And to start, I've started with just a random North American team as a placeholder in all 10 spots. And I'm going to be filling in that order, who I think the top power level teams are coming into this split. Number 10, I don't think there's any surprises here, is going to be Tip. They basically lost their entire roster from when they were best. So that's no more Impact, Rush, Xiao, no Adrian, and no Apollo. Blank there for a second. But they have Gate, who's going to be apparently swapping between mid lane and support. The rest of this roster, they are technically true Korean imports. They also have Mash, who was in the LCS in the spring split of 2013, which was the first split ever of LCS, and he finished second there with Good Game University, who turned into Coast later. But this team honestly looks like a bit of a mess. I don't want to spend too much time on these guys because there's more interesting stuff to get to. Number 9 on the roster here, I actually have Team Dignitas. So this was pretty tricky. When trying to decide between the 7th, 8th, and 9th teams on the power ranking here, there was a lot of variance every time I ranked them between RNG, Echo Fox, and Dignitas. And I have Dignitas down here for a few reasons. It's not because they don't start splits well, which typically they actually have in North American LCS. They usually start out of the gates hot, cool off in mid-season, collapse near the end of the season. This particular split, I think they've lost 2 of their better players. Gamsu and Core JJ are both gone. They picked up 2 European imports from the Challenger Series, Kiri and Smitty J, and they're returning Shifter and Kiwi Kid and picking up Apollo from Tip. I think Apollo is good. I don't think any player on this roster is particularly bad. I just think there's higher powered imports from elsewhere in the LCS. And I don't know if the play styles on this team are going to work out. Looking at Shifter and Apollo in particular, I've always been highly critical of Shifter falling behind almost every game in lane, CS-wise. But it works for him if the rest of the team is able to create advantages, because Shifter's still a really good team fighter. He sits at the back of fights, he knows when to go and execute kills, and he knows how to create pressure that way. But that requires, for it to work, very aggressive members on the rest of the team. Apollo kind of filled the same role as Shifter did when he was on Team Impulse. You cannot have 2 people sitting at the back of a fight waiting for people to get low. It just doesn't work. So either Shifter or Apollo is going to have to change their playstyle pretty substantially if Team Dignitas wants to have a chance this year. Number 8 on this, I actually have Echo Fox. So they're right next to Dignitas here on this graphic. This is a really fascinating team. They have a lot of variance, but most interestingly enough, there was a lot of ownership changes in the North American LCS this split. Rick Fox purchased this team. He is a 3-time NBA champion. He also played for Phil Jackson, who I think is one of the best coaches in sports history. So he will bring a lot of philosophy of winning to this team. The problems that they're going to face right out of the gate, though, is he purchased them after a lot of the top-tier free agents had signed to other teams. So it's actually pretty impressive that he still managed to pick up a roster that doesn't look that bad, but it's also not a roster that looks like it can make a huge amount of noise in their first split in the LCS. Going down player by player, Big used to be Baby Eater, or Baby, but changed his name now. He was a challenger player. Keith, a lot of you guys know, for his small stints in the LCS, which showed a lot of success. And I kind of want to talk about the difference between those moments and the challenges he's going to face here on Echo Fox. When Keith first came into the LCS, he was replacing Piglet on a really talented Team Liquid roster. He was in an environment to succeed. Everyone on that team could create a lot of their own pressure and opportunity, and Keith just kind of had to be a role player and pick up kills in team fights, which he did very well at. Then he played 1 game for Team SoloMid, who was also a top 2 team in North America, and he was successful in that game as well. Here, though, he's going to be put in a new environment, not the same pedigree as far as the success of the team and not as much talent in every role, except for maybe Froggen, who I'll get into in a minute. This will be Keith's chance to really prove himself, because before he was a good role player on some successful teams. For Echo Fox to succeed, I think Keith actually has to be a star, which will be fun to watch. Looking at Froggen, this guy, back in Season 2, the best of the best. Since then, he's had really up and down success, and we've seen through Alliance and Elements that Froggen alone on a team isn't enough. He needs to have good chemistry with his team, and the meta has to fit the way Froggen wants to play. Currently, the game feels pretty fast-paced. We'll need to see Froggen adapting to that. Luckily enough, Anivia is quite good at controlling the fast-paced game if he wants to go back to that. He's going to work on his champion pool. He's got to adapt to a bunch of new teammates, and it's going to be a whole other set of challenges for Froggen. Really excited to see him come into the LCS here. But at the same time, there's so many unknowns on this team. Hard was Cloud9 Tempest jungler. He will be getting his first shot at the LCS. He's got a lot of big names to play with. Now you're playing with Froggen, one of the most famous mid laners of all time. Big time that he needs to step up. And then, if that wasn't enough variance in the Echo Fox lineup, KFO adds a whole nother level. He was around rank 40 in Korean solo queue as a top laner, which is more impressive than rank 40 on a different solo queue ladder. Korea probably has the most competitive solo queue ladder in the world. But with that being said, he is a Korean speaker, doesn't speak the same language as the rest of the team, and he is new to the competitive game. That is an incredibly difficult situation to be put in. The only player that comes to mind that's been put in that exact situation was CLG Seraph back a couple years ago. That did not work out well. So KFO has some huge, huge challenges. Just for some context, the rank 40 in Korean solo queue is quite high. There's about 5 or 6 other Korean top laners above him on the solo queue ladder, and those are mainly just from the top tier Korean teams. So there was LCK interest in KFO, but it wasn't necessarily to immediately be a starter. It was more to be in a developmental capacity. So a lot of opportunity for KFO to come in here with a powerful owner, get starting experience, and just see how he can grow. Pretty damn risky, though. Number 7, I have Renegades. Or technically, I think I saw their try code was REN, because Royal Never Give Up is RNG. Yeah, REN. This team has a lot of star power, especially from the people who've been following League for a long time. Monte Cristo, owner, Alex Each mid lane, Crumbs jungle, Freeze as the AD carry. Pretty big names within League of Legends, but not necessarily relevant names as of last year as far as who their players are. Freeze would be the hottest ticket because he was pretty successful last split and has been looked at as an up-and-coming AD carry, whereas Crumbs and Alex Each have a completely different, I would say, history. Alex Each was one of the best mid laners in the world 4 years ago, and since then has been trying to live back up to that name. The nice things I would say for Alex Each that are going to happen on Renegades that didn't happen during seasons 3, 4, or 5 is he kind of has a sense of stability finally. When he was playing in the European LCS, he had to travel every single week. The team could never get a good practice environment in. He was always trying to find a stable place for his family because he has a wife and child. One of, I think, the only LCS player in North America to have those two things. And now Renegades has been able to set him up with some stability, so he can focus on League of Legends and maybe reach back to that potential he had in Season 2 when he was really at the top of his game. There's a reason people are still really excited about Alex Each. It's because he was so good and he's gone through so much, but if anything, he is incredibly dedicated. So I want to see if Renegades can succeed with him because there's a lot of other challenges on this team. Crumbs has been super swingy as well. There was a moment, I would say probably early 2015, where I thought Crumbs was the best jungler in North America. It was only for a few weeks, but he had such good vision control instincts. He knew exactly the right ward spots. He was very good at defending them, and he just kind of manufactured wins through controlling vision. But when that wasn't working, when other teams were beating him in the vision game, he didn't have any other facets of his game where he could outperform the enemy team. So Team Dignitas at the time would just lose games really slowly and boringly, and Crumbs took the brunt of that criticism from the public and from his own team. When he stepped down from Team Dignitas, he said a lot of it just had to do with not having the same way of looking at the game as the rest of the team. So I hope, for Renegades' sake, that they don't run into the same struggles and that everyone is aligned. Everyone from within the Renegade camp says they are aligned. I think Crumbs has matured a lot. He has a leadership role on this team, and he's going to have to try pretty hard because they're currently ranked 7th, and there's a lot of big-name teams above them. At least 7th for me. They might have their own internal rankings and their own aspirations. Number 6 for me. I should probably talk about Remelia and RF Legendary really quick. Remelia, good up-and-coming support, but she does have a fairly limiting champion pool. Thresh, Morgana, and then you're really wondering what she's going to pull out next. You need a much bigger champion pool in the LCS, especially across the course of a season. And every LCS support can play Thresh at a high level, so unless you're willing to first pick that, it becomes a really big weakness for Renegades. So she'll have to step up in a champion pool way if Renegades wants to climb. And RF Legendary, probably the biggest shoes to fill of anyone else, because there are some very good top laners in North America, and RF Legendary will be making his LCS debut. Number 6. It pains me to put Team Liquid at number 6. Because they're so interesting, and they were so good last year. Especially during the later half of the summer split, it looked like Team Liquid was the best team in North America. So the fact that they're coming in at 6th here is kind of sad. Looking back at what happened to them there, regular season was great. Playoffs, they lost a tough series to TSM. It felt like that snowballed a little bit, lost another tough series to Team Impulse in the 3rd, 4th place game. Then they lost in the Gauntlet tournament to Cloud9. And that is just gut-wrenching because they were looking like they could get the number 1 seed and the top group positioning at Worlds. And then they ended up doing this. And then in the offseason, they lose Quas. He stepped away from League of Legends, so he will no longer be playing. And they already had 2 of their import slots taken up by Phoenix and Piglet. So they took a while to pick up a new top laner who they announced as Lorlo, who compared himself to RF Legendary. He obviously wants to perform well and has a lot of growing to do, but his starting point isn't exactly like, oh man, Lorlo, that guy's great. You're just like, oh, Lorlo, okay, I hope he can step up. It's tricky for him. Smoothie as well is replacing X Special, at least on the currently listed starting lineup. Because the big story for me at this team, aside from the collapse they went over last year, is the fact that they're instituting a 10-man roster. And this has a lot of potential for success. In their announcement, they said they're using it for motivation for other players, but I feel like the true advantages of having a 10-man roster are numerous. So if you think to traditional sports, never do pro teams practice against other pro teams. They practice internally so they can develop their own strategies, and the other teams have to react to the player tendencies when they play against the player. But there's like this incestuous scrim culture within North America where everyone, pretty much every region, everyone just has to scrim each other because they don't have built out enough teams to be able to scrim themselves. So over time, it's very hard to give a completely new look when you play a team on stage. But Team Liquid has the potential to do that. And the secondary advantage to this is they get to practice against themselves and mimic their opponent's strategies. So the best ways to practice sometimes is playing against progressively harder versions of something. So you can practice how to beat it on a fundamental level without being really good at it, and then you kind of gradually up the difficulty. If Team Liquid wants to prepare to play against TSM, so to speak, they just need to have the sub-squad try and mimic and study the playstyle of TSM, play their champion pool, and then have Team Liquid practice beating that with whatever strategy they plan to beat TSM on. Team Liquid's invested very heavily in their infrastructure, even though they haven't brought in big start players this offseason. They have 10 players, they have a big coaching staff, they have position coaches, the whole works, and we'll see if that can, over time, mold the good team, even though they lost some star power and went through a collapse last year. So I see Team Liquid kind of in a league of their own, because they could just continue their spiral downwards, or they could use this nice 10-man roster and really exploit some advantages and climb pretty high. So I'm excited for Team Liquid, but I'd say cautiously optimistic. Number 5, this is where it gets really difficult to rank because these teams are getting actually quite good. I put NRG here. NRG Esports, apparently. They picked up Impact from Team Impulse, Moon from Imagine in the Challenger Series, GBM from the LCK, Alltech as well from Gravity, and Conquan. Conquan, they said, is the glue of the team because he speaks both Korean and English, and he's actually going to be doing some in-game translation, which is really tricky to pull off at a high level in League of Legends, but it has been done before. Alltech, really solid AD carry, seems to be able to carry games, but doesn't look like he does anything super flashy. GBM, if you didn't follow the LCK, there's kind of this tier of Korean mid laners. There would be Faker, Easyhoon is right below him. Coco was really good as well. And then the next tier was kind of like GBM, Kuro, and Nagne. So he is really a top tier Korean mid laner now coming to the North American LCS. And that puts Moon in a really good position because he has 2 of the best solo laners in North America, at least by talent, with which to work in the jungle. It makes your decisions so much easier as a jungle if you can rely on your lanes to win. So if RNG has winning lanes with Impact and GBM, Moon is going to end up looking really good. Another farm distribution point on this team. If there was ever a team that really bought into like the 2 support strategy, which would mean the jungler as a support and the support as a support, it would be this team because their star power is so loaded in the top lane, the mid lane, and the AD carry that their gold distribution could be really wacky. But I think it could work for them. They also have a pretty good coaching staff. History Teacher's the GM. Hermit was the coach of Origin during Worlds last year. They got him as well. And they also announced a team of remote analysts that should be really exciting to see how they mold the team across the split. We've never really seen, as far as the level of infrastructure in all of North America, we've never seen it this high in North America. So I don't know if it'll start necessarily that good and clean because of all the imports that we've seen, but over the course of the split, I think the play should clean up pretty substantially. Number 4, I actually put C9. And a lot of people have Cloud9 much higher than this, 2nd or 3rd for most in the power rankings. And they definitely have a lot of talent. It's kind of ridiculous. Like if you look at the way Cloud9 ended the year, like at Worlds, after winning the gauntlet and then being probably the best performing North American team at Worlds, and then they add the North American LCS MVP as Rush, how could this team not be top 2? They could be top 2, for sure. But let me say some potential weaknesses. High is role swapping again. He first went mid to jungle from spring to summer split, and now from summer split to the next spring split, he's going jungle to support. And we've seen how pivotal High is to this team. I wonder how long he will be playing here because they do have Bunny Fufu, who I think is one of the best supports in North America, who is currently sitting on the bench. And I think it was pretty good shot caller last year. I think once this team switches to Bunny Fufu, if he can pick up High's shot calling, then this team becomes top 2. But for now, I don't think High is going to be that good of a mechanical support. When he switched from mid lane to jungle, he had a lot of holdover mechanics from the mid lane just to execute ganks. He didn't have to practice as much, and he could heavily watch the map while he was jungling to dictate the flow of the game. Supports are just below that in their ability to dictate the flow of the game. If I kind of had to make the ideal position from which to shot call from a tier list, I would say jungle is the most ideal, then support, then mid and top lane are really close because in competitive, the top laner can go in a lot of different places and do a lot of roaming, and then AD carry will be the hardest. So it's not like support is impossible to shot call from, but in order to pick up your 3rd role in less than a year and also have a shot calling burden, on top of not being able to practice as much as some of your competitors, makes it a bit too big of a task for High to live up to, in my opinion. And then the second thing that I think Cloud9 needs to worry about would be the synergy between Rush and Jensen. Jensen is Incarnation. He changed his name from last year. And in the summer split, Jensen started off pretty poorly. He was missing a lot of CS, losing a lot of games, and then High switched over to jungle, and he just had this huge upward trajectory. He honestly became top 3 mid laner in North America pretty easily. And a lot of that was because if you watched High's jungle pathing in those games, he was camping mid lane. And you listened to it in the interviews afterwards too. High had Incarnation's back. Incarnation trusted High would be there for him, and it unlocked a new level of aggression and comfort for Jensen. With Rush, I don't know if that comfort's going to be there. Rush is so good at looking out for himself, but I don't know if he actually is good at looking after a mid laner in the same capacity. Watching Rush solo queue, this is like an anecdotal example. There's the pink ward that enemies place kind of hidden behind your red buff in the jungle. I always talk about it in casts how, always check that brush because the extra 2 seconds that it's going to take to look in that brush is so valuable versus the information you give away for being spotted. In solo queue, Rush was streaming. He walked through that brush, saw the ward, and said, "Sneaky, come kill this ward. I don't want to waste time." And it's because he is so efficient in the jungle. And he just said, "I just won't go there. I know where the ward is. I just won't go there anymore." And he went on to carry the game. He got like 15 kills on Italy. But that type of style doesn't mesh well with babysitting a mid laner. So they will have to find a new formula to make that work. They definitely have the talent. They're in the top half of the LCS easily. They could definitely make a shot for the top. But currently I have them fourth because the LCS is pretty stacked this year. And in third, higher than most would have them. What happened to my formatting here? There we go. I have CLG. People seem to forget that these guys won the summer split. Yes, they lost Doublelift. But if we pay attention to their messaging throughout the offseason, it's a little scattered at times, let's be fair. But they technically said they did all this by choice. We'll start with the simpler one, Huhi for Pobelter. That was an initial announcement saying Huhi was moving to the starting role and Pobelter was moving to the bench. And then because Pobelter wanted to find different opportunities, he ended up leaving the team and they stuck with Huhi. They said they wanted Huhi because he had better overall game understanding than Pobelter and fit in better with the team. And if we think about the way that CLG plays in the early game, it actually has more teamwork than pretty much any other North American team. It is nothing but rotations. It is nothing but lane swapping. They're constantly moving around, and they seem to win 75% of the games just through the early game. Like they were so good at that part of the lane swap game. Their strategic coach is now their head coach, Zeke Fall. So they haven't necessarily lost any of that. And maybe Huhi can fit in even better than Pobelter did as far as the mid lane transitions for that. The real question mark to me would then be Stixxay versus Doublelift, which, yes, it is a hit. If they still had Doublelift, I would probably have these guys ranked number 1 in North America for the preseason. But with Stixxay, I have him currently at number 3, and obviously with some variance. One thing that can happen when such a big personality and star player leaves a team is it can create an opportunity for other players to step up and grow. The big space that is kind of vacated by Doublelift means Darshan should step up, Smithy should step up, Aframu should step up, Stixxay should step up, and it can just kind of elevate the whole team instead of having everyone working towards elevating Doublelift. Doublelift had a higher gold share than any other AD carry in the North American LCS. I don't think Stixxay is going to be the same. There will be a wider gold distribution on CLG. They might become a more dangerous foe, but it's really hard to say now that we haven't seen CLG step up on the LCS stage. But I think the potential is absolutely there, and CLG fans can rest easy for now. I don't think it's over just because they lost Doublelift and Pobelter. Now, number 2. Is TSM for me. Which means I actually have Immortals at 1. For whatever reason, I'll start with TSM. And it's not because I don't like their roster additions or the changes they made in the offseason. They brought in... They had one of the best offseasons they've ever had. They liquidated their roster. They only kept Bjergsen. They lost Loker. They brought in the new coach. They brought in the European LCS MVP in Yellowstar. They brought in one of the biggest stars in North America in Doublelift. They brought in one of the best junglers in Europe in Sven Skaren. And they brought in one of the most promising North American-based top laners in Hanser. You really couldn't have done better in almost any position for TSM. Maybe you could say they should have gotten Pickaboo for support, but Yellowstar, I think, is a better culture fit and can gel better with the rest of the team communication-wise, especially since they need him to shot call. So, A+ across the board for TSM. The only reason I don't have them as first is I need to see how they mesh together first, since every individual player on this team is going into the next split with 4 new teammates, which is an immense amount of change. And there's a new coach, so even Bjergsen loses the familiarity with everything. Everyone is in a completely new environment. They have the talent to be number 1, absolutely. But they have a bunch of people who are used to being the alpha on their team as far as who gets the farm, who gets their way, and now they all have to coexist. Bjergsen, Doublelift, and Yellowstar. How will they solve disagreements? Does TSM have the means to work this out? We'll see. They're number 2. Even if they don't work it out, I still think they finish really high. If they do work it out, they could be really damn good. Which moves us to number 1. And these guys are just a hair above. Obviously, these are week 0 power rankings, so after week 1, they could completely change. But the main reason I have Immortals above TSM is because of the synergy of Huni and Reignover. Looking at the way Fnatic won games last split when they went undefeated, and specifically looking at the gold distribution throughout the team and their overall gold share for the team. Huni and Reignover were highest gold share for their role in top and jungle, especially when compared to their mid laner and AD carry on Fnatic. Rekkles and Febiven were actually towards the bottom of the gold share in that regard, because the way Fnatic played was Reignover and Huni would pretty much work together to get Huni ahead, to get Reignover ahead, then Reignover would take over the enemy jungler, and all the while, Febiven and Rekkles were really strong at keeping their lane even so that they could then crush in teamfights thanks to Huni and Reignover's giant leads. It was mainly Huni and Reignover, though, that were creating the advantages, which now Immortals has that power for Huni and Reignover to create advantages, and they just need Pobelter, Wild Turtle, and Adrian to go even or above, and they can get some of the same leads. Pobelter is not Febiven, but he could grow into something like that. Wild Turtle is not Rekkles. Wild Turtle is Rekkles, but he is not the player Rekkles. I think he was a little bit handcuffed later in the split when he was playing for TSM, because you cannot make Wild Turtle a passive player. When he was number 3 of the top 5 accounts in solo queue, he was incredibly aggressive, he was incredibly risk-seeking, and he was incredibly successful doing so. When I started hearing stuff like TSM telling him that he gets 1 mistake per game, or that he can't flash forward, it's the easiest way to cripple a player. And I think this new opportunity for Pobelter, Wild Turtle, and Adrian will have incredible motivational power to keep these guys strong, because they could be the best team. And essentially, at least for Pobelter, Wild Turtle, and even Adrian, they're outcasts who are still really good. Adrian as a support, just to touch on him for a second, has 4 accounts, as far as I know of, high in Challenger, which as a support is remarkable. It shows his ability to adapt to any situation and support in the best way. And he had to do that frequently last year on Team Impulse. Yet it definitely felt like Team Impulse wasn't respecting his talent. And I feel like on Immortals, he'll find a way to get that respect, and they have a lot to prove. And the final reason I put them at number 1 here is I'm really reminded of the summer split of 2013, when Cloud9 was a really strong challenger team, and I was getting everyone's predictions before the year. Everyone had Team SoloMid at number 1. And they're like, you know what? I think this Cloud9 team is really good. And across the board, people are like, yeah, Cloud9's really good. They should be number 2. Yeah, they're really good. They should be number 2. This new team, they're number 2. Because no one really wants to put a completely new team at number 1 because it's too risky. Immortals is that team. They're the Cloud9 from the summer split of 2013. If they execute properly and if they achieve their maximum potential. So I'm really excited for North American LCS. And this video was much longer than I thought it would be. So hope you enjoyed it.